Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Jerry Scanlon. I'm the Director of Marketing for Enhanced Vision. I would like to turn the webinar over to our guest speaker, Dr. Kevin Huff, who will be speaking on visual impairment diagnosis. How do I cope? Dr. Huff?
Thank you, Jerry. I want to welcome everybody to the webinar, and once again, thanks to Enhanced Vision for allowing me to speak on this topic. It's a topic that, as a doctor performing low vision evaluations on patients every day, I'm faced with this exact scenario that's going through patients' minds of, now that I've been diagnosed with visual impairment, how do I cope? And when we do this title, how do I cope, the word that really sticks out to me in that phrase is I. How do I cope? And the reason that sticks out for me is in working with thousands and thousands of people who have had to face visual impairment, it's very apparent that the strategies for coping and the mechanisms for coping and the time it takes to cope is very individual based on each person. I will see some people cope in very different ways than others, and so it is important that as we're discussing this, I don't want to present a presentation that is coming off as this is the only way to get through this situation that someone's having to deal with visual impairment. But I do know that having watched people cope with visual impairment through the years, there are certain characteristics that I see in the patients who are being most successful with coping with visual impairment, and I think identifying those will help people. Now, visual impairment is something that people tend to either be born with or they're acquired later in life. Everyone who is visually impaired has had a moment in their life when they first found out or they first realized that there was a problem. For patients who have congenital conditions, meaning they were born with these conditions, it starts with parents of that patient coming to a point where either prenatally before the baby is born or after the baby is born, that they realize, hey, there's something wrong with my child's vision, and they come to a moment where that first really hits them. As the child with visual impairment, obviously as a baby, they're not going to process that at that point, but later on in life there is going to come a moment where they realize, hey, there's something different about my vision than what everybody else is dealing with. People with acquired conditions, meaning they come on later in life, it's easier to point to the exact moment when I realized, hey, I have a problem here and I'm going to be visually impaired. If we had everyone listening today given the opportunity to tell their story about when this first hit them, we would hear a lot of different accounts and perspectives. It would actually be an interesting discussion in my point of view, but we would hear a lot of different things described. However, there are certain phrases, emotions, and scenarios that I think would come up in many of the accounts, even though everybody is very different in how this is going to be presented. Some phrases that I hear all the time when patients are discussing when they first realized that they had a problem with their vision was things like, I had never even heard of, and then fill in the blank before, macular degeneration, glaucoma, retinitis pigmentosa. We also hear a lot of people say things like, are you sure I don't just need more power? And that's a feeling that people get when they're first told that they have a problem with their eyes. Are you sure you're not wrong? There's just something else you could do here that you're not giving me. And we're going to go through why people feel these ways. Another phrase I hear a lot is, well, how am I going to work if I'm blind, or how am I going to drive if I'm blind, or read if I'm blind? And I use the word blind because that's the word people tend to say when they first hear that they have visual impairment, because they immediately equate being visually impaired with being blind, which many of you in the audience understand that those two things don't go hand in hand. But again, whether you're your first instinct is to be concerned about, am I going to still be able to work? Am I still going to be able to drive, read, take care of my children? Whatever it is, that's an emotion and a feeling that people tend to immediately go to is, how am I going to be able to do this activity still? Another thing we hear a lot of is, how did this happen? I put a little translation here. I think when someone's questioning, how did this happen to me, I think what they're really saying is, I need a place to put my anger and frustration that I'm feeling. Where can I put that? And we're going to discuss that a little bit more in depth here. Now, patients aren't the only ones that are having to be in this scenario. My perspective as a doctor is different. When we go home at night, we go home not visually impaired, whereas patients are. So it's not as permanent, and it's not as obviously devastating to us, but at the same time, doctors will react differently in the way that they give the news to patients. And this is going to vary differently based on what specialty the doctor is, their personality, whether or not they are seeing these types of patients a lot, or if it's something that's very rare in their practice, will really drastically change how they're going to respond to this situation. You'll have some doctors that'll try to minimize the effects of the disease. Oh yeah, it's not that bad. At least you don't have this, you know. And I've heard that from a lot of patients. They come in and they say, well, they told me I have macular degeneration, but they said at least it's the dry kind and not the wet kind. And you know, while there have been scenarios in the past where we did believe dry is better than wet because it's a slower progressing condition, now with treatments to wet, that's not as true. And the fact is I tell patients, you know, they want to know which is better, dry or wet, and I say, well, neither. You know, it's better not to have macular. And so to try to minimize the effect of what this is going to have on someone, doctors will say things like, at least you don't have the wet kind, or at least you don't have retinitis pigmentosa, or at least you don't have a retinal detachment. Whether or not that's helpful or not, that is something that does get said a lot. You'll also have some doctors that will just give minimal information. I try not to have to talk about it. Well, you have glaucoma, but we don't really know much about how bad it is yet, so we'll just check you next time and walk out the door. You also see doctors do the opposite, where they give too much information. You have patients who are just showing a very early sign of drusen, which is a very early precursor to macular degeneration in the eye, and the doctor goes through a long discourse about losing all of your central vision and not being able to drive and not doing this. And really, this is something the patient's probably not going to have to face for another 10 or 15 years. There's a delicacy to actually giving this news without also making someone go home and be depressed over something that's not really going to be affecting them for a while. So doctors, we also tend to struggle to acknowledge the emotions the patient is feeling. You know, doctors, we tend to think very clinically, structurally. I have a lot of problem with this with my patients. They go to their doctor and he says, oh, everything is the same. And the patient has noticed a very large difference in functional vision. Well, when the doctor says that they're the same, what he's saying is that structurally their ocular health has not changed drastically, because doctors, we think in terms of clinical situations and ocular structural health. But they're not acknowledging the fact that, yes, structurally it's very much the same, but functionally the person is really struggling to read their paper or to do a certain task. And so we tend to not acknowledge those emotions patients feeling. Now, just from a doctor's perspective, and not making excuses for doctors, but I will tell you, in the industry of eye doctors, one of the reasons when people ask, why did you get into this business? One of the funnier ways I had someone describe it to me was, well, you don't have to wear gloves and everybody keeps their clothes on. It's a very clean profession compared to a lot of healthcare professions. But one of the biggest things that attracted a lot of us into eye care is the fact that we get to send the majority of our patients away better than when they came. Patients come in and say, you know, my vision's a little worse at near. We give them a little better prescription. They leave better than when they came in. And a lot of healthcare fields don't get that. And so in light of that, it's a little easier to understand how doctors might struggle with not being able to do that. We like to fix things. You know, as doctors, we don't like to leave things unfixed. Well, in a lot of cases with visual impairment, we can't fix things, and a lot of doctors struggle with how to respond to that. Ultimately, we as doctors, and also I'm speaking to the family members of people who have visual impairment, we need to be able to respond to patients in a way that's going to help them cope with their vision loss. And when I say cope, again, there's going to be a lot of strategies towards that. But ultimately, all of us should have the same goal of helping our patients and helping our family and loved ones get to a point where they are better situated to be able to cope with their visual impairment and lead as independent lives as possible. And so we have some strategies that go along with that. One of the things I love to talk to people about is how do we respond to people who have visual impairment. Some of the things that I see come up a lot would be that stressful life situations really often accompany vision loss. And I see this all the time in my practice where a patient spouse passes away or they have another physical ailment, you know, like a hip surgery. And right about the exact same time that happens, their vision fails them to some extent. And it's very hard for someone to not equate those two things together. I have a lot of patients, you know, they'll come in and we'll have a conversation like this. Well, do you do much reading anymore? And the answer is no, I haven't read much since my spouse died. Okay? Now when they say that, you know, you could look into that as, well, I'm depressed because I lost my spouse, which is a very natural feeling towards that situation. And that's made it so that I just don't do much anymore. And I don't read much. Or what they're probably saying is, you know, my vision got worse about the same time and it's made it difficult to read. Again, they're equating two things that are separate, but it is pretty natural for them to do that. We'll also see this with patients who have had bad medical outcomes. And what happens is they tend to equate everything that happens after that bad medical outcome to that, going back to that same situation. So I had patients say this to me, you know, ever since that doctor botched my cataract surgery, I can't read the newspaper. And what you have to understand is this was a patient that I saw who actually had the cataract surgery. It went very poorly, and that was true, but their other eye still saw wonderfully and still read. Later on, they developed macular degeneration in their eye and then couldn't read. But in spite of the timeline not matching up with this, they still equated, you know, if I wouldn't have had that bad surgery, none of this would have happened. And so it is important that we help patients separate events like that. And you know, when we do that, we can't deny that, hey, you know, this was a bad situation. Cataract surgery is usually very successful, but it really didn't affect this right eye. And the struggle you're having right now is in that right eye. And so getting people past that, when they hold on to that bitterness or that anger towards what's happened, it hinders their ability to move forward. So when someone makes these comments, one of the things that we have to do is we do have to acknowledge what they've said. If it's not addressed, again, it can be a hindrance to them accepting treatment options. And so I've actually learned that in exams with patients, there are a lot of times where I have to actually stop the exam. We're in the middle of doing a refraction where I'm checking a glasses prescription, and they'll make a comment like, you know, I've always hated this test since my dog died. You know, and it sounds odd that someone would say that, and when I hear that, I have to say, why is he saying this to me? And we have to acknowledge the fact that, you know, he's obviously feeling loss from his dog passing away, and so we need to figure out why is he equating that with a refraction test that has nothing to do with it. If we don't help the patient separate those things, then I'm not going to get good results with my refraction. One of the best strategies and techniques that I've been given and that I think does help very much in helping patients respond to the emotions they're feeling would be something that's been described as the 3.0 response. And the basic breakdown of what a 3.0 response is you use a phrase, "you feel blank because." And what you're doing with that phrase is you're acknowledging the emotion and the cause of the emotion. People instinctively will respond to people by either acknowledging the emotion but not why they're having that emotion, or they'll acknowledge the cause of the emotion but not what emotion they're feeling. And so that would sound more like, instead of just acknowledging the emotion, I understand you feel angry. Well, that's part of the equation, but if you just say that, the patient is not hearing that you truly understand them. They're just hearing that you hear their anger, but they don't really hear that you understand why they're angry. And so we have to go further. So instead of that, you feel angry because your vision was worse after cataract surgery than before. Okay, and so in a phrase like that, I've acknowledged that previous patient I was talking about, that they are angry, and that it is valid that they would feel angry because that anger is coming from a cataract surgery that did not work as well as they'd expected to. And it is natural that someone would be angry about that. And so when we acknowledge that, we're able to move forward. Here's another longer way of saying it. You must have felt a huge loss when the spouse you loved and shared all those memories with passed away. And now you're having to deal with the separate issue of your vision getting worse. So you're acknowledging the fact that they did feel this loss when their spouse passed away, and now they're having to deal with another loss, and that their vision is going away. And so they've linked those two events because both of them created a feeling of loss in their mind, even though they are separate events. And by separating them out that way, it does help them see that, okay, I need to move forward and see what I can do to help with this vision loss, because obviously, unfortunately, we can't help anything with the spouse. For our family, one of the things that we have to really pay attention to when we're working with our loved ones is we have to be very careful to find the balance between helping and hindering. And I tell patients this can be a very difficult thing to do. 20 minutes before this webinar, I was seeing patients, and I just had this exact same conversation with the gentleman I was working with. We have to help our patients not fall into a trap of just becoming dependent on family members. When you become dependent on others, it can be more disabling than the disease itself. And I've seen this in a lot of patients. I've seen it in my own family. My grandfather has macular degeneration, and quite honestly, when his vision started failing him, he stopped doing things like taking care of their finances and things to that nature, and had my grandma doing them, and it got to where the fact that he wasn't doing those things was more disabling than the macular itself. Even though with a lot of the tools we had available for him, he still could have done them. They just weren't easy to do, and it was frustrating to him. And without being able to get through that frustration, it just makes it so that he's even worse off than what the disease should be doing just in itself. At the same time, families need to support patients' independence by encouraging them to try new things. Help patients realize that they need to be willing to purchase the necessary tools. A lot of patients, when we do an exam on them, they'll see, wow, yeah, that really works. And then I'll hear things like, yeah, but I can't afford $70 for a magnifier, or I can't afford $3,000 for a CCTV. I often have family members come up to me after patients make comments like that and say, they have plenty of money, I don't know why they won't buy that. And the reason they're not buying it is not financial, it's emotional. And we're going to go through some of the emotions that they might be feeling. Usually someone who's saying things like that truly has the money to afford it would be in a stage where they're trying to bargain. If we don't accept this gift, this tool right now, maybe he'll show me something better. And so it is a form of bargaining. Sometimes it truly is a situation where financially someone just can't do it. Now, when that's the case, there are a lot of resources that are available to help purchase these things through state agencies and through the Veterans Administration. And so as family and loved ones, our role in that situation is to help them process through the paperwork and the bureaucracies that are needed to be done to help the patients obtain these things. Because usually there are ways to obtain all the devices that someone would need to help them stay independent. Now, when we're going through visual impairment, there are certain emotions that do tend to come up consistently, and they do tend to be very similar to the famous ones that you hear a lot about when people are talking about someone who's been diagnosed with a terminal illness. The emotions that people go through would be fear, shock, denial, bargaining, anger, depression, acceptance. Okay? Now I have those listed. They're listed in an order that tends to be an order that you see people go through. Some people go through them in different orders than that. Some people don't go through all of these steps. But these are emotions that are very common that people go through as they're first having to face visual impairment and learn how to cope with it. Fear is a big part of what we're facing with visual impairment. There's a Gallup poll in 1998 that showed that 42% of adults listed blindness as their most feared disability. There have been other studies that have actually shown blindness is actually more feared than death. And in formal study of talking to patients every day, I hear this every day from patients that, frankly, losing vision is worse than being told that they have a terminal illness. And so why is this fear developed? Well, vision is our most dominant sense. People say, I could have lost hearing, I could have lost an arm, I could have lost this, just don't take my eyes. You know, I hear that all day long. Why is that? Well, we rely on vision for most activities that we do during the day. And then what happens is when you start having vision loss, you start equating that with a loss of independence. A loss of independence goes towards a loss of self-worth and self-esteem. And so that's why this fear is created in patients. Patients will often go through a time of shock where during shock it seems as if the brain just stops gathering new information and just gets stuck in time. Shock is actually a coping mechanism that our body physiologically has created to help us through traumatic times. Again, when it comes to being told you have visual impairment, I don't know that physiologically it's needed, but it is our body's response. And so patients will often say things like, it really took a few days before I really understood what that doctor was telling me. I've had patients say things to the effect of, I didn't even know what was going on. All of a sudden he was putting a needle in my eye. And this would be a patient with macular degeneration who thought, well, I have the dry kind, and so that's the better kind. Someone had told him that. Well, everybody starts with dry, and some people progress into a wet, about 15 to 20% of people. This person had progressed into that, and suddenly he was getting a needle in his eye, and his brain was just not able to process what had happened because he had gone through a little bit of shock when he was told that now you have wet, because it just did not meet the expectation that he had had. Again, with a lot of these emotions, one of the biggest things I always mention is this is a normal response to a very emotionally painful situation. After shock, we do hear a lot of denial from patients. Patients often doubt the diagnosis. I just didn't sleep enough last night. If you test me tomorrow, I'll see better, and you won't think I have macular degeneration. That's one of the ones I've heard before. And again, as a doctor, I sit there and have to process the fact that the amount of sleep someone has nothing to do with the fact that I can see some of their retina is missing, and that's why I'm diagnosing them with macular degeneration. Your retina doesn't come and go based on how much sleep you had. So it's a very irrational thought, but at the same time, it's very rational in the patient's mind. And so we have to kind of figure out, okay, well, why is he equating this with his macular degeneration? We'll also hear things like, oh, those doctors have never told me I have macular degeneration. This is a patient who had been getting shots in their eye for many years. And I had mentioned, because of your macular degeneration, you're having trouble seeing people's faces. And they were kind of arguing with me that they didn't have macular. I said, well, what are you getting those shots for? And their answer was, well, to help my eyes. And so they had denied the fact that they had a problem. They just thought they were getting shots to make their eyes better, but they really hadn't acknowledged what had really happened to them. Bargaining is a stage I mentioned earlier that people go through. Bargaining is where you latch on to the idea that there is something out there, and you're kind of holding it back from me as the doctor. I hear about this all the time, where I saw a guy who had these special glasses that he could read with, and he was blind. Why don't you just give me those? Unfortunately, I have to tell patients just about every day, there are no magic glasses that are just going to make people see better. And one of the ways that a phrase that I've been able to use that seems to help patients through that is, if there really were magic glasses that helped people with conditions like macular degeneration see better, you'd have to imagine that every doctor's office in the country would have them. It would not be a hard thing to find, because just like patients are desperate to find solutions for their activities, doctors are desperate to find solutions for patients too. Again, I go back to, why did we get into the business of being eye care professionals? Well, because we like fixing things and we like helping people. And I promise you, if there was a device that someone could just get a regular old pair of glasses that was a special pair that could make everybody read and it was that easy, every doctor would have it. Now, I don't want to minimize the fact that there are a lot of tools available when I'm doing this discussion, but there's no easy way out on this, and that's what people are bargaining for. As a doctor who's prescribing things for patients, I have to be very careful to make sure that they're really recognizing what and accepting the treatment options I'm giving them, and not just bargaining with me. Because otherwise they're going to end up with a bunch of devices that don't work, and they're going to end up in a drawer. Here's a scenario that goes on in our office. I show a patient what we're going to do for them. Maybe we'll give them some very strong reading prescription, which is very effective in helping patients read more effectively, especially early on in macular degeneration. But there is a compromise that they're going to have to hold things closer because I have a shorter working distance. And so a patient will say to me, sure, I fully understand. I'm going to have to hold things closer with these new glasses. And so I've gotten the habit where that's something I make the patient essentially say to me 3 or 4 different times before we'll send them away with the glasses. Because I've had a lot of patients come back, even after going through that, they'll return the glasses after a few days and say, well, I knew I was going to have to hold things closer, but I didn't think I was going to have to hold it that close. And I just go back to the fact, well, I showed you in the office exactly how far away it was. And again, this wasn't something where the patient was not listening to me or not paying attention. They were, but they just emotionally were bargaining with me, thinking if I just get them to make me these glasses, maybe I won't have to hold them that close, like you say. Again, that's not a conversation they're actually having in their mind, but it is, I think, what essentially is occurring. Patients also often try to negotiate their terms to continue driving, and that's where we do a lot of bargaining with patients. As family members and loved ones, this is one of the more difficult parts of visual impairment, and something that we have to be willing to discuss. I'm going to go through some phrases that I've heard from patients. One we hear a lot of is, I only drive in my comfort zone. And that's something that we hear, almost everybody who's visually impaired will say something to that effect to me. And the reason they're saying that is, it is visually much easier to drive in an area that you're very familiar with because you don't have to read street signs. When I drove to work today, I didn't read a street sign. I just knew I turned there and I turned there. And that's a lot easier visually than going to a doctor's office you've never been to and you have to read all the street signs. But the fact is even when you're driving in your comfort zone, if you have blind spots in your vision, like from macular degeneration, there's a higher percentage of accidents happening close to the home than far away. And that's just statistically true. I have patients say things like this. I scan my eyes all the time when I'm driving. That's usually said by someone who has a very narrow field of view. I've had patients with retinitis pigmentosa with field of views less than 20 degrees who are still driving. And their bargaining and their way of justifying this is, well, I move my eyes to the left and the right so that my field of view is expanded that way. Well, the problem with that is in traffic accidents, and it's usually split-second scenarios that cause accidents. It's not something that you saw coming for 5 seconds and just didn't react to quick enough. It's usually something that happens in less than a second. So what happens when you're looking to the right at the split second that someone's coming from the left? You're just not going to be able to react to that. And so we have to address the fact that when you have a very large peripheral vision defect, driving is usually not very safe. I'll have patients say things to me like, I've driven for blank amount of years without any accidents or tickets. And that's something that I have to acknowledge what they're saying. They're saying that I've driven for 60 years, and I've been a great driver. And the fact is there are plenty of very well-sighted patients who don't have records like that. And in a patient's mind, I'm going to be safer than that crazy kid I saw driving out there, while texting on his phone while he was driving. And in a lot of ways, that's probably not invalid. But when someone says something like this to me, we have to separate the fact that they have this great record from the fact that they now have different vision than when they were driving most of those years. So I will say patients who say this to me, well, how many of those years were you visually impaired, or how many of those years did you have macular degeneration? And usually I get a response of, yeah, I guess I know what you mean, and so again, I also will add in something to the effect of, that's a great record, I wish I had that record, and I'm glad you have that record. It makes me more inclined to consider driving with you than if you had a record of crashing every year. But you also have to keep in mind how many of those years were you visually impaired when you're driving. This is one that we hear a lot of. I just need to drive 3 blocks to go to visit my spouse in the nursing home, okay? Or some other very valid reason for wanting to drive. I have no family and no friends in town, and if I can't drive 3 blocks to the store, how am I going to eat, okay? Again, we have to point out the fact that even when you're driving just a short distance, that's where a lot of accidents occur. A lot of my patients tell me essentially I have to drive, and that's what they're saying in this instance. And there are other options for getting around. Some cities have very good public transportation, some don't, but I try real hard to get my patients out of the mode of thinking you have to drive. There is always alternatives. It might not be alternatives that you ever wanted to face, but there are alternatives. Here's another one. I need my driver's license renewed so that I'll have identification. I don't drive. Again, this is one that I hear probably once a month from patients. And my response to that is, well, you can get government-issued ID without driving privileges. You don't have to have a driver's license. You can get an identification card from the motor vehicle departments. When I mention that, usually the person will then come forward and say, yeah, well, I still do drive to and from the store a little bit. And so basically they were lying to me when they said that they just need identification, that they don't drive. Again, these are not evil people. They're not bad people. They're not malicious people. But it's just a way of bargaining. Well, if I don't really drive a lot, then I just need my driver's license for that, and this is the way to get it. So again, we have to confront patients with that. I just need license in case of emergency. I hear that a lot, and I ask patient, what emergency are you describing? Usually they'll say, well, something's wrong with my spouse. I tell patients, you don't want your first time driving in a few years to be driving your spouse to the hospital. When my wife was in preterm labor with our second child, I drove her to the hospital. That was not my best driving day. I did not drive it as safely as I normally do, and my vision's perfect. Someone who's visually impaired, driving for the first time while their spouse is having a medical emergency, it's not a good scenario. And I tell patients that's what we have ambulances for, and you need to use those. Here's probably the worst one I hear a lot, and people would be shocked at how often I hear this. My wife tells me when it's safe to turn, or my wife tells me where to turn. Basically, the husband is driving because he's always driven, but he can't see well enough to drive, so the wife tells him when to turn and when to watch out for things. Obviously, that's just not a good scenario. I know I don't see well, but I only drive on isolated roads. If I crash, I won't hurt anyone else. Unfortunately, this is a direct quote from a patient that I saw who I've been seeing for over 5 years. And he said this to me after I had told him he can't drive because his peripheral vision was poor. And we got a letter from his family literally 1 month later that he had killed himself in a one-car accident. And when he said he wasn't going to hurt anybody, he was talking physically. But judging from the letter we received from his family, they were very emotionally hurt by this. Our staff was hurt because we really liked this patient. And I use that story just to help people understand, when I first started doing this, I know emotionally, as the doctor, it was hard for me to say no to patients because I knew what I was taking away when I said no driving. And family members have to go through this too. But you do this long enough, and unfortunately that's one of a handful of stories I can tell of patients who I physically was in contact with who did very bad things with car that involved in deaths. And so you start accumulating those stories, and it becomes an easier conversation to have. From a family member's perspective that's helping someone who has visual impairment, unfortunately you don't have the opportunity to accumulate stories like that because it only takes one and you've lost your loved one. And so we have to be willing to have these conversations. And the key to doing it is doing it from a perspective of love for the patient and wanting to help them be safe. Moving on, anger is something we see a lot of. Again, this often begins with the question, why me? When there's no person or thing to blame for the vision loss, patients sometimes they get resentful of others who have not experienced this loss. So family members feel the brunt of a lot of this anger. Patients will often make very emotionally charged comments when they're feeling anger about their visual impairment. I hear things like, if you tell me I can't drive, you might as well chop my legs off. I hear that a lot. Or reading is my life. If I can't read, I should just die. And unfortunately, I have a lot of conversations about death with my patients because there's a lot of anger and depression that they're feeling about it. Again, I tell patients, it's perfectly normal to feel anger about vision loss. What we need to do, though, is we need to help identify when someone is holding on to anger about their visual impairment and help them to deal with it. If the anger is out of control and it's hurting relationships, it's maybe necessary to get other professionals involved, a counselor or a therapist. Again, I've seen a lot of marriages and families have trouble with the fact that that anger that they feel towards their vision, they start taking out on their spouse, and that's just not a healthy way to place their anger. Depression is something that also follows anger a lot, and again, this is a normal reaction to vision loss. Patients' self-image and their self-worth often decrease when you're no longer able to do little things for yourself or even big things. And that can take away a lot, especially for patients who were very independent before their vision loss. I hear things like, I'm pretty much worthless now, he or she does everything for me. I can't even sign a check anymore. Now when I say these phrases, I have to be careful as I'm speaking to an audience like this. Some of you may be feeling this, and I don't want to rub salt in the wound, but at the same time we need to identify, hey, this is something, you're not alone in this. These are feelings that are natural and that people have. The key is we have to move past this. And again, we're spending a lot of time discussing these emotions because I think it's very important to be able to identify the problems. But in a moment, we're going to get to where we're actually trying to help with these problems. With depression, you also hear things, and this is something especially with macular degeneration, I hear a lot of is, I feel like I'm in first grade when I read, and they're reading that word by word instead of scanning their eyes like they used to, and it just makes them feel like less of a person because they can't read as quickly as they used to. We also hear things like, I always had perfect eyes. I don't understand how this happened to me, and that's especially people in professions that are known for their vision. I get a lot of pilots in my office, and they're very much emotionally tied to their vision because it's been part of their identity through their life. Depression is a very prevalent thing. There have been studies that have shown that patients with macular degeneration have about a 33% risk of developing depression. That number is probably even a little low because I think it goes undiagnosed in a lot of people. Some signs of depression that I think everybody needs to be very aware of is if you see a change in sleeping patterns, meaning you're sleeping more than you used to or you're not able to sleep, a drastic change in eating habits, again, eating more or eating less, or changes in activity level, which tends to be lessening of activity. Those are all signs that maybe you might be dealing with depression or your loved one might be dealing with depression. And if that's the case, you do need to make sure that you seek help through counselors and therapists. Ultimately, we want everybody to get to the step in the process that we refer to as acceptance or acknowledgement. And that's where you're making peace with the permanence of vision loss and moving forward with all the different options that are available. Okay? It's our job as doctors and family members to try to help patients get to this stage as quickly as possible. Again, I've seen patients jump right into this stage within days of being diagnosed with visual impairment. I've also seen people for decades stay out of this stage and not get to this point. And everybody, this is where I say it's very individual. People are going to cope differently. We're not going to look down on people who take longer to do this because emotionally they have to go through those steps. And you just have to understand that everybody's going to go at their own pace. But it is our job to try to help them through this because ultimately if we can get to this stage, then we can start working on coping mechanisms. I'm going to go through some of the different steps we talked about. With shock, you know, this is hard to help patients get through their shock because it is a physiological response. Biggest thing I can tell people is, you know, just be there for patients when you recognize that they are in shock and they're just not processing things like they should, you know, that mentally they should be able to process what the doctors tell them, but you can just see a glazed look in their eye that they're not. This is not the stage where you need to really be throwing facts at patients because it's not really going to help because they're not going to process them. And what ends up happening is the patient is in shock, and then you have the family member who desperately wants to help, goes home and does an internet search on the condition, and then they'll come to their family member and start spouting off a lot of facts about the condition. And while it's important in other stages that you show that you understand a little bit what they're going through, during shock, you know, the patient's just not going to be able to process it. So all you really need to do is just be there for them. Denial is when patients aren't really accepting what's happened. You need to help patients understand your expertise in this area. And again, as doctors, I have ways of describing things that hopefully they help them understand that I do relate with what they're going through and know what they're going through. As family members, this is where having that knowledge about what they're going through and the facts is going to help. And so when you start hearing someone denying what's going on, if you can say, well, you know, the reason you're having those blind spots in your vision is because of the macular, it's something that you might be able to gain their trust better. Bargaining, when patients are bargaining for treatments, we have to be able to recognize that they're doing that instead of actually accepting, and that can be a hard skill. With the family, what we ask people to try to help with is help patients have realistic expectations. We don't want them thinking, again, that they're getting magic devices that are going to make them read the way they did when they were 20 years old and didn't have visual impairment, but at the same time, understand that they are there because they do help. Okay? My slides are not going forward. There we go. Anger. We need to help patients understand that, you know, this anger is normal. It's not a sign of them having a personality flaw. It's just part of the coping mechanism here. But we do need to help them deal with it in a healthy way. Family members can help their loved ones identify the areas of misplaced anger and help them realize that the true cause of the anger is the vision loss So if you see them getting very upset about things that normally they wouldn't, just help them understand that this is probably the vision loss that's causing you to feel that way. With depression, again, the big thing with that is just to help patients stay as independent as possible, and there are a lot of different strategies to help with that we're going to get into here. But when depression is identified, just help patients feel good about the fact that they should be getting assistance and not feel a stigma of going for help as being a sign of weakness or a problem, because a lot of patients do tend to feel that way. I'm not going to go to a counselor because that's a sign that I have a problem. Well, you do have a problem and need to help with it. And so helping patients get to that point is an important part of the family's role. Ultimately, all of our goals in whether you're helping someone with visual impairment or whether you are a person who has visual impairment is we want to help regain independence. One of the biggest keys to helping someone be independent is using tools that we use in low vision rehabilitation. Not just using them, but using them correctly. I would say one of the biggest barriers to getting someone to move forward and be able to cope with their visual impairment by using the tools that are available to them is just having a resistance to learning something new. Patients really like to hold on to, well, this is how I've always done it, and I don't want to do it differently. Again, probably a little bit in the bargaining stage at that point, but we need to really help people remove those barriers. Now, when it comes to tools that are available to help with coping with visual impairment, and there are a number of different aids that are available. I'm going to spend the amount of time I have left talking about some of the electronic magnification devices that are available. We prescribe a lot of reading glasses. We prescribe telescopes for distance vision. We prescribe handheld magnifiers, and those are all good aids. I'm going to do the electronic magnifications because, frankly, that's where most of the innovation is coming at this point in my industry, and it's frankly the better options for most people, and you'll see why as we discuss it. Electronic magnifications, electronic devices for magnification, the biggest advantages, if you just want to lump them in a big category of electronic devices, would be that you do get a very large range of magnification, in some cases all the way up to 75 times. Now, most things we don't need 75 times magnification, but there is a range of magnification that we're just not able to get with other optical devices. Electronic devices also tend to increase contrast and decrease glare. We don't have to get as short of a working distance as we do with strong reading prescriptions. We can use our computers with them. Now we're having some advantages in that they are portable. We can capture images, and with some we can point off in the distance and see distance images. If we want to list disadvantages for electronic devices and why we don't just go straight to them with everybody, one would be cost. They do tend to cost more than magnifiers and some glasses, although these days glasses are getting expensive enough that some of our electronic devices are less expensive. Now again, when cost becomes an issue, there are options to help with this. There are state agencies, there's Veterans Administration. We have a program called Care Credit where people are able to get no interest financing through an outside company for their devices. Portability used to be something you hear about, but now with the new HD cameras that are much lighter weight and the LCD screens, we're able to get portable electronic devices that are very lightweight and easy to carry around with you. I used to hear this more, hard to use, meaning it's hard to learn how to use electronic devices. I don't hear that nearly as much anymore because we are becoming a very technology, gadget-driven society, so people are pretty comfortable with using technology at this point. The different types of electronic devices that are available, I usually break them down into about 4 categories, and these aren't hard and fast rules, but it's just the way I look at them. We have a new category where there's HD cameras and text-to-speech CCTVs, and we'll go through some of those. We have the conventional desktop CCTVs, we have portable CCTVs, and then the type that I tend to call the acrobat class. I don't know if I'll keep calling that forever, but that's it was the first one that really came out that was in this class of CCTV, so I still call it the acrobat class. The first CCTV that I mentioned is the DaVinci HD OCR. This is the CCTV that frankly, I think we're doing the most of in our practice at this point, and there's some definite reasons for that. It's a very high-performance video magnifier. Has HD camera, it has text-to-speech, and it has a 3-in-1 camera. Now, the HD is very, very nice because even when you're on the very low magnification levels, the image is very clear. Historically, to gain better resolution at higher magnification levels, there did have to be a little bit of a compromise on some of the lower magnification levels. Now with these HD cameras, there is no compromise, and that's very helpful in our patients, especially our patients with conditions like retinitis pigmentosa, where a lot of times they don't need extreme magnification. They can do well with the lower ones. They just need the enhanced contrast and the enhanced field of view with the magnification. And so they're using these CCTVs at lower magnification levels. Well, when we're using these cameras that are involved with the DaVinci and the Merlin Elite, the resolution is so crystal clear, even at low and high magnification levels, that it's just much more helpful to use. You can also experience, the way it's labeled is experience the joy of reading with the push of a button. These text-to-speech capabilities of the DaVinci, and then you'll see on the Merlin Elite, is very, very helpful because a lot of our patients, they will read and they say, boy, my eyes get tired after about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Well, now that we have text-to-speech, you can read, and if your eyes get tired, you can switch to using the text-to-speech where the device will actually scan the material you're trying to read, and it'll read out loud to you. And so that's been a big jump forward for our patients and their ability to use their CCTVs for longer. And patients who have very poor vision, who have historically used their computer to read through programs like JAWS and Zoom Text, now they're able to do the same thing with live things like a bill they receive in the mail. Again, we've talked about the HD camera. With the DaVinci, one nice thing is it is a 3-in-1 camera, meaning you can point it at near to be able to see things when you're reading and doing near tasks. You can also point it far away and see things off in the distance. You can also point it at yourself. So it can be used to put on makeup or to shave or to do hygiene activities like that. The monitor sizes, and I'm going to go into some of the specifications, but we'll have some time to talk about that during the question period. But it is a 24-inch high-resolution LCD monitor. Ultimately, when you really look at all the different modes that we can set this to, there are 28 different modes. So you can usually find the best combination that works with your eyes. The Merlin Elite HD OCR is a desktop CCTV that also has the HD capabilities we just described and the OCR, meaning the text-to-speech capabilities. A lot of patients like these desktop CCTVs versus the DaVinci, which I just showed you, just because the buttons are very easy to use. They like using the tray underneath it, although the DaVinci can come with a tray as well. So it's just kind of a personal preference. We usually have patients try both and see which one they feel most comfortable with. Some of it depends on what patients' goals are. Again, it's going to provide a lot of the same advantages that the DaVinci does, except for in a nice, easy-to-use desktop model. The Merlin LCD and HD CCTVs are very similar to the Elite. I would say the biggest difference is that you don't get the OCR technology. But again, it's combining a very large magnification range and large field of view. And with all the CCTVs, they're enhancing the contrast. The trays are very smooth, so when you're reading, you're able to, even if you're reading at very high magnification levels, you can very smoothly move where you can see the different parts of the page without losing your place. And the controls, again, are very, very easy to use. These desktop CCTVs are excellent options for reading and writing and looking at photos. You know, my grandfather uses his CCTV to look at photos a lot, and you know, when my daughter was born, he held her and he said, well, she sounds cute, but he couldn't see her, and that's kind of his humor. Well, when he puts his picture under a CCTV, he is able to see her face, and it makes him enjoy her a whole lot more. Again, simple to easy to use. And one nice thing about the Merlin HD and Merlin LCD is there are different monitor size options. The smaller the monitor, that tends to lower the price on the device. We tend to really recommend the larger monitors just because the larger field of view that's gained with the larger monitor is usually worth the little bit of extra price on that. The Acrobat is the one I mentioned before. It's like the DaVinci in that it's a 3-in-1, and it is something that can be moved from room to room, house to house. This was a big deal for us practicing in Arizona. A lot of our patients live here in the winter, and when it starts getting to be 110 degrees, they're somewhere else. And so they needed to be able to bring the CCTV around with them, and the Acrobat was the first one where we could really do that. Again, we can do that with the DaVinci very easily, and so a lot of our patients are now moving to the DaVinci from the Acrobat, but the Acrobat still provides a very good option. With the Acrobat, there's also options of just getting the arm and some other options that you can look into to make it work in your home environment. Again, it's very good for reading and writing. One thing I like about the Acrobat and LCD is there's a lot of open space underneath the camera, so it is very natural when it comes to writing and working with your hands. And you can slide the cameras from side to side, so we'll have patients slide the camera and point it at an easel, and they're able to see what they're painting when they're painting very fine details, that kind of activity. You can point it at your own face to do makeup. You can point it at other people's faces. We pointed at my daughters, and it helps my grandfather see their face better. You can also point at distance. The specifications are very similar to what we've described already in that it comes in different monitor sizes and has the 3-in-1 camera, 28 different viewing modes. You can also use line markers to help keep your place when you're reading. And there's, again, we could probably spend an hour just talking about all the different features of all these devices, but I wanted to go through a summary of the different ones that are available. Transformer is one that we use a lot with our patients who are really on the go, patients who are students, patients who work in an industry where they have to go to a lot of presentations. As you may be able to see from this picture, it works with a computer or a laptop. You plug it in through a USB port. It's very lightweight, easy to carry around with you, so it's wonderful in that. Functionally, it works very similar to the DaVinci and the Acrobat in that it is a 3-in-1. You can point it far away, you can point it near, and you can even point it at yourself. But it is more portable. Another big advantage to it is you can capture images with it, meaning a patient can point it at a board where a professor has written a full board full of notes. They can take a picture of it, and then they can go back to it later and scan it and zoom around and read those notes. So in note-taking situations, it's very helpful. Again, it's very lightweight. The camera rotates a full 330 degrees to help with the 3 different viewing modes. It has the 28 different custom color modes. And, it does use a battery that lasts up to 4 hours, and it has built-in LED lighting, so even in a dark room, it's still going to work. And it comes with an auto-install software, so you just plug it into your laptop, and it's a plug-and-play software. The Amigo is a portable CCTV that we've been using for a while now. The advantage to the Amigo is it gives you a very wide field of view for a portable CCTV. And it can be used, to see pill bottles and thermostats and price tags and labels and menus. Again, it's got the largest field of view for our portable CCTV options here. And the screen tilts up and down, which allows very comfortable use. It can be connected to a TV monitor so that you can use it as a CCTV, like a desktop CCTV, where it's the camera for the CCTV, and that gives you even larger field of view. So patients who are traveling and don't want to carry a DaVinci or an Acrobat with them can use their Amigo in that way. And it is able to freeze images. The screen is a 6.5-inch LCD screen, and that's why it is able to be so good a field of view, but at the same time lightweight enough that you can carry it around with you. The Pebble comes in 3 different sizes: the 4.3-inch, the 3.5-inch, and then the Pebble Mini. And again, that's just to help people with different desires for what they're doing. The Pebble is comparable to the Amigo, except for it is smaller. You can carry it in your pocket. It's lighter weight, easier to hold, more like a traditional magnifier that you'd be holding, optical magnifier. But the advantage to it over optical magnifier is you're getting a much bigger field of view for the amount of magnification you're getting, and you're getting that enhanced contrast where you are able to make black and gray newspaper print into white and black, or black and white, or black and yellow, whatever color works best for you. And it is an ideal size for patients to carry around because it is about just about pocket size there. This is just a slide comparing what I just described, why the Pebble does have a lot of advantages compared to normal standard optical magnifiers. And it can be used for reading and other what we call near spotting tasks, being able to read menus, shopping. The fact that you can freeze the image, I show patients in our office all the time where I hold up to a small sign on the wall and say, look, if this was a price tag, I could just take a picture of it and bring it closer and see it instead of having to get on my hands and knees to read that price tag. When I first started saying that, it was just something I said offhand, but then I came to realize a lot of my patients were on their hands and knees in the store reading price tags. And so the fact that they aren't going to have to do that anymore now that they can take pictures of the price and bring it closer to their face, it makes it a lot easier for them when they're shopping. And again, there are different size screens depending on which Pebble you're getting, and different magnification levels. That kind of brings us to the end of the presentation. We did want to leave some time to have some time for questions and answers, and so we'll open it up to that. And I do appreciate everyone attending, and I appreciate Enhanced Vision allowing me to speak on this topic again. So I believe there is an area where if you have a question, you can write the questions out and we'll be able to read them over there. Jerry, I'm not able to see any questions. Have any questions come through?
Hello, Dr. Huff.
Yes.
Oh, there we go. We have a question. If you know of any magnification products that start at 1x, the Enhanced Vision products only start at 2x.
Yeah, I don't know of any that start at 1x. I think when we got it down to 2x, I think everybody was pretty pleased that we finally had some options down at that low. And like I was talking about before, even before when people labeled that they had something as 2x, the image was just not as clear as we would want. But now with the new HD cameras, even at the very low magnification levels of 2x, we just are able to do much sharper image. But if we have someone who really only needs 1x magnification, we're still having to use optical magnification. And usually we can achieve that with a good reading prescription on the glasses, if that's all the magnification that's needed. So we wouldn't necessarily have to be going to electronic devices in that scenario.
Dr. Huff?
Yes.
We have a question that asks if you have any occupational therapists in your practice.
We do have an occupational therapist in our practice, and that's something that hopefully you're going to see more and more of throughout the country, where the different professionals that are involved with rehabilitation are coming together and even being in the same building and same practices. Our occupational therapist does a lot of work for us, obviously, in training patients how to use devices, also in helping coordinate resources for patients, and we found that when patients make a purchase, like on a CCTV, they're much more successful if they have the time to and have the opportunity to actually work with someone who has the training in how to train people. And that's where the occupational therapists are very helpful. And like I said, you're seeing a lot of that in practices across the country where they are working together. And our occupational therapist has been our practice, I believe, since 2005 is when she started with us, that we've been working with her.
Okay, we have another question, and it is, what is your experience with telescopes for distance?
We've been using telescopes for distance forever, and they've been very helpful. There's three main types of telescopes. There's handhelds, which usually in our industry are used as monoculars, where you're doing one eye. They're very helpful because you can get very large magnification levels, but they are a little unsteady, and you have to be trained how to use them and hold them in a way where they are going to be pretty steady to use. They're very helpful in spotting street signs and menus in restaurants. We also have spectacle-mounted telescopes. Those can be very good for watching television, watching theater, watching plays. And the advantage to them is they are very steady because you're wearing them like glasses. Disadvantage to them is we can't get quite as much magnification as we can with the monoculars because they would be too heavy to wear. And also the fact that they're sitting right in front of your eyes makes it so that walking is not possible with them. And then the third type is the bioptic telescope, and that sits right above the eye. And so you are able to walk around with them. And then if you need to see something, you just tilt your chin down and you're able to read street signs and things like that. Arizona has a law allowing people to use bioptic telescopes for driving. And so we've been doing that in our state for several years now. Other states have been doing it since the late 60s. So The answer is yes, we use telescopes, and they are very helpful in distance settings.
We have another question, and it's, can the DaVinci HD hook to a 40-inch HD TV, HDMI, or what? And at this time, the DaVinci cannot be hooked to a television, as far as we know. Doesn't say they're going in the future. And then we have one more question. Someone was asking about financial resources to help them with the purchase. There is care credit, but we also have on the Enhanced Vision website a section called Low Vision Resources, which will help you find a local organization by state that may be able to help with the purchase of your device. So that's all we have for right now. We have a tremendous amount of thank yous, and we appreciate everybody's time. And thank you again, Dr. Huff, and hopefully we'll be doing this in another 2 months.
Okay, I appreciate it, Jerry. Thank you.
All right, everybody have a wonderful day, and thank you. Bye-bye.